These are African rhythms, passed down to us through ancient spirits. Feel the spirit, a unifying force. Come on, move with the spirit. Stand up, clap your hands, groove with the rhythm.
Welcome to Africa World Now Project. I'm your host and producer, James Pope. Today, we explore the significance, meaning, and legacy of IRR50 with Colin Prescod. Africa World Now Project is next. This year, 2022, marks the 50th anniversary of the radical transformation of the Institute of Race Relations. On April 18, 1972, the direction and relevance of the IRR was transformed from a policy-oriented establishment academic institution to an anti-racist think tank. This momentous change shifted the Institute's focus, responding to the needs of Black people and making direct analysis of institutionalized racism in Britain and the rest of Europe. Sivanandan opens Race and Resistance, the IRR story, with this speech. The war has been over at least 6 years, and we have brought our boys back home. But European capitalism lies weak and bleeding. We had to let India go, and we are not going to be able to hold on to other colonies much longer, not with the trouble they're giving us. We do not have the coercive power. We do not have the money. Let America have them if she wants to. But as for us, it is time we got out. Let us leave the natives their independence before they take it from us by force. Let's bring home our administrators too. And the sooner we leave, the sooner we will be able to recoup our loss of face. We can tell them that they are now ready for self-government and that is why we're going. That is what we intended all along. We only governed them for their own good until they came of age. That way, at least we can have them on our side. But we cannot leave it to chance. We must work at it. Show them that they are members of a larger, more grown-up family, that their color makes no difference, or else the communists will have them. And then we will have compounded the problem of race with the problem of class. The purpose Sivanandan opens with this speech is to highlight the context and ideological foundation upon which the IRR, as a department of Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, was formed. The convergence of these events is vital to understand in order to see the possibilities of institutional transformation in all of its complexities that is to come to be the Institute of Race Relations as we know it today. Nevertheless, Sivanandan goes on to point to what he considered to be the speech that made the Institute was in fact delivered by H.V. Hodson, one-time member of the Government of India Reforms Commission and later editor of the Sunday Times, on May 4, 1950, at the Royal Institute of International Affairs. It was as follows. There are two problems in world politics today which transcend all others. They are the struggle between communism and liberal democracy and the problem of race relations. Of the two, I'm prepared to argue that the problem of race relations is the more important, since for one thing, it would remain with us in its full complexity even if communism were settled down to a peaceful neighborliness with democracy and a world partitioned between them. But the comparison is really to no purpose. Both problems are of crucial importance for the survival of our civilization. Writing the editorial in the current issue of Race and Class titled IRR50 and the Revolutionary Act, Jenny Bourne asserts that the vote of IRR's members on April 18, 1972 to support the IRR staff's execution of IRR's aims and commend the coverage of its magazine, Race Today, was one of the most significant steps in British relations. Till then, the study of race relations had been firmly in the grasp of the establishment under the political sway of government and the economic control of big business. The number of writers on the subject could be counted on the fingers of one hand. There were no departments in universities, no equality programs in local authorities, no black people to be seen in media, politics, church, or civil society. Nevertheless, the path towards transformation were inevitable. For instance, at a meeting of the Race and Neo-Imperialism section of the British Sociological Association, an IRR researcher read a paper in which he critiqued color and citizenship, the book from the IRR's 10-year survey, on the basis that it served to make the powerful elite more powerful and the, quote, subject population relatively more impotent and ignorant. Jenny goes on to write, in a sense, the battle at the IRR over how it was funded and what knowledge it produced could be seen as part and parcel of the battles that had raged through the universities during the 60s. But in another sense, the IRR struggle was unique in that black people's experience of racism was so obviously at odds with the focus of the IRR, it had to bring about the collision. The legacy of these historical changes to the internal workings of the IRR have been fundamental and enduring. But what is important to recognize is the way in which that struggle so many years ago was to change the parameters of debate, policy, research, and representation around race throughout the country. For Jenny, who is still highly active with IRR, the reason that the battle at IRR caught the public imagination is because it showed, too, it was not necessary, in the words of Sivanandan, who became director in 1973, to be, quote, paralyzed by our histories, end quote. Quote, we do not have to be at the barricades to be revolutionaries, he wrote in the preface to Race and Resistance, the IRR story. We do not have to be grassroots to be radical. To apprehend the social consequences of what we ourselves are doing and to set out to change them is in itself a revolutionary act. Today, we will explore more deeply the significance, meaning, and legacy of the 50th anniversary of the radical transformation of the IRR with Colin Prescod. Colin Prescod is a British sociologist and cultural activist originally from Trinidad, who in a career spanning 5 decades has worked as an academic, documentary filmmaker, theater maker, and BBC television commissioning editor, as well as being involved with many cultural and community projects. He is chair of the London-based Institute of Race Relations and a member of the editorial working committee of the international journal Race and Class. Other positions in which he served include member of the London Mayor's Commission on African and Asian Heritage, on the Greater London Authority's Heritage Diversity Task Force, founding chair of the Drum, and chair of the Association of Cultural Advancement through Visual Art. This program is part of a collaboration between Africa Vote Now Project and the Institute of Race Relations and its Journal of Race and Class based in London, where we engage in transnational dialogue that intentionally disrupts dominant discourses around racial oppression. These programs are designed to inform the ways we think about the persistent and evolutionary nature of global racial oppression in order to develop an analysis to radically and systematically address it. Our show was produced today in solidarity with the Native, Indigenous, African, and Afro-descendant communities at Standing Rock, Venezuela, Corporation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Brazil, the Avalon Village in Detroit, Colombia, Kenya, Palestine, South Africa, Ghana, Haiti, and other places who are fighting for the protection of our land for the benefit of all peoples. Enjoy the program. Thank you, Colin, for joining us today. I am excited just as much as you are about having, this deep, extensive conversation about the Institute of Race Relations, its 50th anniversary, but really trying to situate IRR in a broader transnational context, but looking at it through the lens of the development of you, your life, but also the communities that shaped you. Your politicization, your intellectual development, your cultural production. You have an extensive, but I see a lot of times in institutions, a lot of times we look at the institutional aspect, but don't necessarily see how the institution developed alongside the development of people, right? Because we were talking about, the IRR, we're talking about the 50th anniversary of the IRR, but we're also talking about the impact that IRR had in the UK, but also transnationally. And, as we were talking, before we begin, we talked about that, there's a historical gap that is forming in these conversations. So with that being said, again, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to having a very lively and a robust conversation. So let's begin. How do we, or how should we understand, or could you talk a little bit about yourself? Like, as we move into this conversation and that we explore this, this revolutionary act, borrowing from the title of the editorial penned by Jenny Bourne, who was also active in this pivotal period that we're going to eventually talk about, that or reoriented the work of IRR. I thought we can start with you. We could start with understanding you. Could you talk a little bit about your politicization, the key moments of influence, the influence of your mother? Could you talk a little bit about the context, that neighborhood that you grew up in? Of course, Claudia Jones is connected. What about the dialectics of Liberation Congress and, the Black Power era? And I know I'm throwing a lot out there, and the reason why I'm doing it because I'm about to turn it over to you to let you go.
Very much, James. But even in the way in which you present me and invite me into this thing, you know what you're talking. You say you're excited. I say I'm coming with great anxiety to this conversation. Okay, you lay down this. I want to use the term I don't know, a smorgasbord of tastes, things we can tap into, Yeah. And I'm thinking, how do I? Anyway, here I am. Okay, let me start in a really ordinary way. I'm reminded, in fact, that I think of myself increasingly, especially as I've now become undoubtedly an older man, maybe even an old man, to describe me. I'm 77 years old, that I've become a storyteller, because I've been, I can't say fortunate. My experience has been to find that I've been in places and I can bear witness to things, people that are of significance and that people have become interested in. So in a way, what relaxes me to say, I'm not here doing research, or I'm not reading a research paper, whatever else it is. But in all of my responses, there's a sense in which I'm reaching for the frame of just being a storyteller. I'm reminded, though, that this guy, Cedric Robinson, who you'll know about from over there, sometimes somebody said to me, as an aside somewhere, Cedric pointed, I said, but the novel, the novel is a form of knowledge. Lovely. So when I say I'm a storyteller, the story, to paraphrase Cedric, the story well told is a form of knowledge. So that's how I'm offering my responses to your question. How did I come here? To do it literally, since we're having this kind of conversation about politicization and about race and racism and so on, I enter the United Kingdom in 1958. I come to join my mother. My mother has already been here for some 3 years and a bit. My mother came not looking for work specifically out of the colonies. She came because she won a music scholarship in the colonies. Good colonialists always involved their natives, their native populations in these kinds of activities. And some of the liberal strand in their colonialism had an issue of encouraging talents amongst the natives in their colonies. And people kind of participated in these. My mother had a wonderful contralto voice, singing voice. She had some training back in the Caribbean when she was a girl, and she entered the territories competition of Trinidad and Tobago, where she's from, and she won the section that she was in, and she won so well that this is how it is passed to her and to the family, that they thought this voice needed further encouragement. So she was awarded a kind of a scholarship, an invitation scholarship, to go to London, to go to the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, to have that voice trained up, anticipating that she might enter, I guess, a classical singing career in some kind of way. That didn't ever happen. We're not going to do that just now. That's her story. But she eventually, I come to join my mother from the Caribbean in 1958. I come to join my mother, who's already living then in North Kensington. It's an interesting site, I think a very special site, as it turns out to be. But the point I'm trying to make about in answer to your fellow, how do I come into the life that I live, the political life, the that I live in Britain. I enter in 58, and in 58, anybody who's looked at the history of Great Britain will know that one of the things happening in 58, in the summer of 1958, just a few weeks after I will have been in England, there's an explosion of riots, of rioting. The big one, there's one in Nottingham as well, up country, is in London, in what's called Notting Hill. So then the history books talk about the Notting Hill riots, the Notting Hill Gate riots of 1958. They happen in runnings in my street, in the street in which I live, in the streets around which I live. So this is my welcome to Britain. Yes, to over theatricalize it. My welcome to Britain is this. So this is where I come in. As a child, of course, you're not aware. They don't come at you. You know, you're below the sightlines of the people who are making the runnings and the riots. You're below the sightlines of the young men who actually, a few months after the height of the runnings in the streets in 58, in early 1959, a little bunch of young working class men, white men, attack a young black man, recently arriving migrant settler from the Caribbean called Kelso Cochrane, and they kill him. I use the word, and not just emotively, so people can really think about it, because people think that lynchings are just about hangings in some kind of way. Simply, you know, I talk about him being lynched. A small lynch mob attacked Kelso Cochrane and killed him. And to this day, no one's ever been put through the courts about that. We will come in a little while, when, as I speak on, we'll come to the fact that not by chance, incidentally, Claudia Jones, who used to live in the United States of America, who was tied up with McCarthyism, there, attacked in the moment of McCarthyism, and who comes to Britain. Claudia Jones is central to organizing protests, demonstrations, not quite a campaign, about the killing of Kelso Cochrane. She organizes marches with placards outside the state offices in town, and raises this as an issue. The slogan of the time was "No color bar." So those were the slogans on the sheets that she has. So this is how I enter. This is what's happening as I enter Britain. Older people to whom I've spoken since in the making of documentary films and so on, have said to me, "Oh, these people talk about the Notting Hill riots, you know, these things that happened over two weeks or so, runnings in the streets in Notting Hill." One man said to me once, he said, "There were no riots in that place. This is not what it was. Listen, this was everyday life for us in this place. It's been going on for months. This was every day that this stuff was going on. The people were chasing us, and we were having to run if we weren't ready, or fight back if we could get the sources together." But this is the moment in which I enter Britain. So you can see, without my knowing it, I'm not pretending, I'm not forcing the situation. I come, we'll get back to this too, I come away from the colonies, margins of empire in the Caribbean. I come here along with other, as it turns out, you know, everybody thinks they're making their own decision, but in fact, if we're all making the same kind of decision, something tells you there's something structural going on here. I come with a bunch of people who are coming. My mother is older than I am, who are coming to the mother country. The line that we have in history, the lovely line that you can see in the old movie tone movies and so on, is about these people from the colonies coming to help the mother country. It's even been, you're going to have difficulty in controlling this conversation with me, James. It's even been, to this day now, we have a thing, the new repackaging of that moment I'm talking about, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, when these Caribbean people, my mother was one of them, I was one of them, come here, is now being described as this is called the Windrush generation. It's called the Windrush generation, and it attaches to a recent scandal where some of the people from that time who had children here, who'd not actually bothered to work out their passport status and all the rest of it, have been being picked up, persecuted, prosecuted as being illegals, yes, threatened with, and some of them actually picked up and put on planes and taken back, with being taken back to where they were, because they don't really belong here. Yeah, these people, the first spin was they've come to help the mother country back in the 50s when I was a boy. Yes, they've come to help the mother country. The mother country certainly needed help. It had devastated itself by being involved in what they call Second World War, as the most recent thing. There'd been a first one. Whenever I speak about, I don't call it the Second World War. I'd say it was the second great inter-imperialist war of the 20th century. If you get it, let's get it right. So people that come here, and the spin is they'd come here to help the mother country, and if you know the hardest criticisms, and you know we had to do the dirty jobs, the nasty jobs, you know, and in that kind of way and so on. So you get that, but actually to have today, for me to sit today to see this, what happened then now being placed under an umbrella of the Windrush generation, which is a fairly anodyne title. It's supposed to connect, of course, Windrush, because the ship, one of the ships that is bigly marked and that Muse was made about, that, and there are photographs of people coming off and Calypsonians singing. It's a very famous piece of old clip archive footage, is people coming off a boat called the Empire Windrush, which was one of the many, many boats between the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s that were bringing people, that were making this journey, bringing people to the mother country to assist and so on. And so today we have a notion of the Windrush generation. It's so embraced, so much embraced that the Home Office, which is the department of the British state, the Home Office runs policing and all the rest of it. The Home Office is a paymaster for what's now being called Windrush Day. A Windrush Day has been declared in Britain. And on that day, you can access funds from the state to celebrate your Windrushity. Yes, I'm making up a word here. I rage about it. And people might think that I'm being a bit ridiculous. Why? You know, people are, in fact, a lot of Caribbeans are quite happy. I mean, people who make protest and who are anti-racist to do Windrush Day because it's the closest thing they've got. It's what they can get their hands on to celebrate the fact that we are here, to acknowledge that they're here, and maybe to get to talk about, you know, some of the struggles people had to go through and so on. But I object to the Windrush Day as a new institutional thing in this society. I smell a rat, yes, because what I noticed left out of that title, the Windrush generation, is the whole name of the ship. It was called the Empire Windrush. I smell a rat because something is called the Windrush generation leaves out the Empire bit. And to include the Empire is to have the whole story. To just do Windrush, you kind of talk about the experience of the people, how they came and so on, but you easily miss the meaning of what was going on through their lives. I'm channeling my Appa Sivanandan, institutionalist and founder, who's one of whose phrases was often, I'm sure he got it from somewhere else and turned it in his own language. You know, one of the great shames of life, so to speak, he wouldn't have said it like this, is to have the experience and miss the meaning. And Windrush and the Windrush generation, hold that spill tells me that. Okay, and back to you. How did I come into Britain in the first place? I came in this moment with all this Windrush population. And I came, for me personally, I come onto the streets of North Kensington in London. And this is where two of Britain's big fascists, one of the biggest fascist names, so to speak, guy called Oswald Mosley, aristocrat of sorts, who was definitely sympathetic to Hitler and started a black shirts movement equivalent in Britain and so on. He was around still in the late 1950s. He'd found a place that he could get on a platform and exploit the situation in, which was North Kensington, because these new black people from colony were here. And he didn't think that they should be accepted just like that. He wanted them sent back and all the rest of it. And he was stirring up poor, desperate, because this is a poor working class area in North Kensington was, yes, as these people come into it. He was stirring them up to get them on his side for whatever his additional purposes would be, by saying, here are these foreigners, you know, here are these people who are not just different but possibly inferior, you know, coming in here having rights and all the rest of it. He and another guy called Colin Jordan, a brown shirt movement man, a British man, were energetically at work in this North Kensington area that I came into. So that's what I come into. I come into something that speaks about all of the issues that my political and activist life has been engaged with ever since.
No, and that's very important, and that's the reason why I wanted to, kind of really pull on these strands, because again, you're coming into an environment, but also what is important too is that a lot of these things were happening, obviously, in the context of before you got here. So by the time you get here, there is a collision of sorts that is happening. And of course, you have Claudia Jones, you have other folk who are also organizing and very aware of these conditions, right? So the reason listeners will see once we get there, this is the context that eventually moves into the development of the IRR, right? So, the context of a institution that is basically a vanguard for the different strands of resistance and folk who are engaging in, attempting to deconstruct these structures. And they're coming together in this institution, right? Talk a little bit more. So this is the entry point. Let's move a little bit further and talk about some of the strands. And I mentioned, briefly, of course, Black Power era, but again, at the same time, there is the Dialectics of Liberation Congress that is happening. What is happening in the context? Because you're here, you're in this environment, you are very much aware and conscious of these things, developing your own political politicization trajectory, but also there's these things that is happening that eventually culminates into you becoming a sociologist, right? Becoming an academic, but then moves you beyond academia to create a way of understanding the world through cultural production.
I want to take you back one step.
Okay.
Don't forget the question that you just raised. Take me back to it, please. I don't think you will. But to describe the moment in which I arrived in Britain as a boy, I was 13 or 14. And to leave out, and I've begun to talk about what I found here. What I came into. Yes, it is true. I came into streets in which Black people were moving around in kind of very careful ways. The papers couldn't avoid reporting attacks and so on. The riots flare up and so on. However, the first house that I enter when I come to Great Britain, to London, get off a boat in Liverpool. I get on a train, I come down to Euston in London. I'm met by one of my aunts. Already then other people around my mother's are in London. As I say, people are coming here from the Caribbean. And she brings me down to London. She takes me off the boat and takes me to what is going to be home, I think, because my mother is working on this day. She's not able to be there. My mother's an actor already by this time. And the first house I enter is a place that the address is still there. It's 1 Bassett Road. There's now a blue plaque, which is a special thing that happens in Britain on the wall, which says, Amy Ashwood Garvey lived here. So the first house I enter is the house in which Amy Ashwood Garvey has been living for a long time. Another reason I dislike the notion of the Windrush generation nonsense, which pretends that Black people are only in Britain once the Empire Windrush and the other ships arrive here. Black people have been here for a long time. Amy Ashwood Garvey was here in the 1930s. She's been here for a long time. She has a house at 1 Bassett Road, and that's where I enter. In Amy Ashwood Garvey's house is where I'm going to meet Claudia Jones. Amy Ashwood Garvey is I have to say it, it's in this conversation. I can't assume everybody around understands what I'm saying when I say Amy Ashwood Garvey. Amy Ashwood Garvey is the first wife, the first of 2 Amys who are wives actually, the first wife of Marcus Garvey. Absolutely huge, iconic is the right word to use, Black figure in the history of Black protest, activism, whatever else it is. And the founder of, still historically, the largest Black organization internationally in history, the UNIA. Now, Amy Ashwood Garvey, first wife, a womanist, an activist who is part of the secretariat that organizes the very, very famous 1945 Pan-African conference that happens in Britain, in Manchester, it happened, not in London, a conference which is attended by everybody who's anybody that we think about historically. CLR James is there, Padmore is around it. The people who are going to be springing West Africa and East Africa, indeed, out of abject colonialism are there. The Jomo Kenyettas, the Nkrumahs, and so on are all there. Amy Ashwood Garvey is part of the organizing secretariat of that conference. She's already here, you know. She's here enough to be part of doing that thing in 1945. This is the house that I enter. Amy Ashwood Garvey, to recently speaking to some people, I said, I want to stop here when we talk about Amy Ashwood Garvey, because we talk, oh, the wife of Marcus Garvey, first wife of Marcus Garvey, and you know, you can do all these other things. But actually, one of the bits of credit she never gets, given that she was next to this man in his formative years, in his most powerful activist years, she is part of the duo that's founding, therefore, the UNIA. She's a co-founder of the UNIA. And it's time people started describing stuff like it really is.
We are currently listening to a conversation I recently had with Colin Prescod, where we are exploring more deeply the significance, meaning, and legacy of the 50th anniversary of the radical transformation of the Institute of Race Relations in London. Colin Prescod is a British sociologist and cultural activist originally from Trinidad, who in a career spanning 5 decades has worked as an academic, documentary filmmaker, theater maker, and BBC television commission editor, as well as being involved in many cultural and community projects. He is chair of the London-based Institute of Race Relations and member of the editorial working committee of the international journal Race and Class. Other positions in which he served include member of the London Mayor's Commission on African and Asian Heritage, the Greater London Authority's Heritage Diversity Task Force, founding chair of the Drum, and chair of the Association for Cultural Advancement through Visual Art in London. This program is part of a collaboration between Africa World Now Project and the Institute of Race Relations and its Journal of Race and Class based in London, where we engage in transnational dialogue that intentionally disrupts dominant discourses around racial oppression. These programs are designed to inform the ways we think about the persistent and evolutionary nature of global racial oppression in order to develop an analysis to radically and systematically address it. Our show is produced today in solidarity with the Native, Indigenous, African, and Afro-descendant communities at Standing Rock, Venezuela, Corporation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Brazil, the Avalon Village in Detroit, Colombia, Kenya, Palestine, South Africa, Ghana, Haiti, and other places who are fighting for the protection of our land for the benefit of all peoples. Continue to enjoy the program.
Co-founder of the UNIA. And it's time people started describing stuff like it really is, or else we're missing the point. This is the house that I enter. This is where I meet but let me scamper a little bit. Very recently, currently, this is how we're talking about the IRR 50 years after the big break that produced the history of the IRR with race and class and so on. And I'm going to lose myself now. Yes, right now, in the work that I'm doing with the Institute, talking about history and how people today may not know about it and so on, one of the things that we have at the Institute, we'll have to come back to it later, is a really highly respected collection of archives about Black British struggle. And that's because of the history, how close to the ground the Institute was. It's an illustration of how that was. And one of the projects that I've been involved in doing with the staff, taken out of the archive, is around, as it happens, so maybe it's been done to be kind to the venerable man who's now at the Institute, around my mother, Pearl Prescod, yes, a little pamphlet. Yes, who was she? Who did she know? And so on. And in developing this thing, I found myself saying, just as I'm wanting to say, Amy Ashwood Garvey isn't to be mentioned simply as, the wife of Marcus Garvey. She should be mentioned as a co-founder of the UNIA, if you really want to have a sense of her size. So in the same sense, looking at this moment I'm talking about, I arrive, I go to One Bassett Road, Amy Ashwood Garvey is there, I meet Claudia Jones there. I talk about my mother as connecting to what I call her personal special sisterhood. Yeah, and I put three other people alongside her. One is a woman called Pearl Connor, who organized artists and activists, and who was an activist in this country. The other is Claudia Jones, and the third is Amy Ashwood Garvey. And I talk about it as a special. This sisterhood, or this, wider than that, this context, this One Bassett Road, this whole thing, my mother's, this is something else that I come into when I arrive in Britain in 1958. These are my roots. These are going to turn out to be my roots, yes, important roots for how I know what to do, how I know how to be. These are the places where I get my nurturing, my instructions on how to look after myself and how to be sure that I'm always responsible to the communities to which I belong, and how to open my mind to understanding the big, long histories that we're in, because this is what comes from these people. And the fact that I have it, that she's there, means that this is actually part of the tradition. It's part of what drives what comes later. This is why I pulled us back in the conversation. We were about to go forward to the Black Power moment. I'm saying in this country, even now, I'm talking to you and I'm enjoying this, because even now, when we talk about history amongst people who are in the movement here in this country, we go from Windrush to Black Power, so to speak. Yes, I mean it's really easy, because that's where the people had they got their shit together. They were up. The residences across the Atlantic. This is we're inside of it. Actually, it means that we leave a little hole, a little gap in what went before. What came before, and an important part of who came before, for me, you begin to have a sense of what came before if you know that when Claudia Jones came to Britain, away from being kicked out of the USA, one of the places she could hold on to was Amy Ashwood Garvey, yes, here, and that she was here early enough to be making the protests, to be leading the protests, organizing protests about the lynching of Kelso Cochrane, the one man who's associated with being killed, black man killed in that 58 riots, famous riots moment in this society. So, yeah, I'm saying that before Black Power, let's just register, that there's a scheme there. Claudia starts the first Caribbean newspaper post-war in this society, thing called the West Indian Gazette. She uses that West Indian Gazette to organize people in communities, to respond to community struggles that people are having, to introduce notions of cultural activation, yes, that can open out concerns that Black people are having in this society and so on. So all of that's going on. I mean, I'm just using Claudia, and I'm talking about Amy Ashwood Garvey. Amy Ashwood Garvey, because she's here longer and is part of organizing, definitely that 1945 conference here, opens us out to thinking about who else was at that conference. So what went before has, Amy Ashwood Garvey inviting Du Bois, whoever else it is, all these to this place. That's before. Yeah. So again, the Black Power movement doesn't arise out of nowhere. The mobilization doesn't rise out of nowhere. There are people. Claudia is a part of laying down the idea of organizing to make struggle. Yes, to these new communities just arriving here. It's not as though they weren't there before. There were people making struggle before that in Manchester and so on. But in this new moment, post Second World War, the great drive, yes, that comes from then on, these people are important underpinnings to whatever comes next. And we're increasingly interested in those. One of the pieces of work that now I do out of the archive of the Institute of Race Relations, it's stuff that we produced. Interestingly, in 1982, I'm a grown man, I've been teaching for a while, I make 4 films with the Institute of Race Relations. I direct 4 documentary films with the Institute of Race Relations for the new, very liberal at that point, fairly free TV space, Channel 4 television, which comes into existence at exactly about that time. And I make 4 films with the Institute, and they're called Struggles for Black Community is the title that I give to them. They're talking about 4 different places in which we can look at the evolvement, the emergence of Black community in Britain. This is one of the places in which we look at a place like, we look at Cardiff, a place in Wales. This is the Institute's work. And the point I'm making here is that these films were made in 82, really to be educational tools in that time from the Institute. Today, in 2022, they're repackaged as a DVD set, and they're available to people in the movement, in schools, yes, and they're history lessons for people. And one of the films is about Ladbroke Grove. And it's called From You Were Black, You Were Out, and it's the history of Ladbroke Grove. Actually, the way I made it was to make it start from that point, the same point you've just asked me about, which is When I Come to Britain, 58, starts, yes, with the thing of, look at this place, riots going on, yes, look at the headlines, look at what's going on, and to actually look at what happens in Ladbroke Grove, how it changes, how the state, the local government changes with regard to these, and indeed, but most of all, to look at the acceleration of Black protest action in this area. This is now a part of our, yes, it's part of the archive that we can now make available to people. Okay, so that comes before Black Power. Now back to your question.
You know, as I'm sitting here thinking, there's an art in making sense. And in order to make sense, you have to pick up all of the pieces. And that's what we're doing. Is we're throwing so much out that we're going to fashion this as best as possible, but it's very rich. And in the middle of this, and I want to make sure that, we keep pressing this point, in the middle of this is the Institute. In the middle of this is the development of the Institute. But also, again, as we are celebrating and recognizing its 50th anniversary, this is the reason why approaching how do we understand, the importance of the IRR in its 50th anniversary is really to look at the environment, the context, the many different things. And so we are actually, for our listeners, we are artists right now. Trying to make sense. We're trying to make sense of a myriad of things that oftentimes, as you say, we make these big leaps, right? We make these big leaps and we forget, a lot of the pieces that are in there, which can be very, very detrimental. So again, let's, moving back to this environment as you're moving, and thank you for filling in that gap. We're here. I'm thinking about the Black Power currents, of course. Again, Dialect is a Liberation Conference, Congress is going on. Obi Igbunya Sr., I have to give a shout out to Obi Igbunya Jr., who's here in DC. Obi Igbunya Sr. is there. Stokely, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael comes there. You set the stage, right? You talked about, 58. You talked about this genealogy. You filled in the gaps, because what we're going to get to, the next question we're going to be, how do we understand the history of the IRR in the middle of all of this? So what we're doing is teasing our listeners, right? We're teasing our listeners.
I could quicken it up. We can try to quicken it up. However, I like the fact that you're talking about Obi Jr. Because I knew Obi Sr.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing here. You can just stay with me and just take breaks off, and you can get your whole history in somehow. I've lived such a long time. It's extraordinary. Obi Igbunya Sr. wrote a little book. I can't remember the title now. And as one chapter of it, just a little 8 or 10 or 12 page chapter, is entitled Pearl. And the Pearl he's talking about is my mother, Pearl Prescod, the woman I came to join in 58. And in this little essay on Pearl, it's a lovely little essay. It's one of those things where, you know how memory works. I don't have to tell you or your audience about this. Memory is tricky. It's some parts are made up where you don't know how to fill in. Anyway, the point is, let me get to it. This chapter on Pearl, Obi in it says, I would not have become the writer that I became without Pearl Prescod. He calls her his godmother or something, that kind of delivers it in some kind of way. He talks about going to visit her house, her lovely grand house in North Kensington. I joined my mother, we lived in the end, not at 1 Bassett Road, but just 2 streets away, where I still am talking to you from here right now. We lived in a basement in what would be called the ghetto, the closer we get to a ghetto, poor, deprived area. in a basement is where we lived. Obi describes, he says, I went to see her, this wonderful woman, Pearl Prescod. Large woman. She was, yeah, he sees her as being as famous as she ought to have been. In a way, for how she carried herself and the way what she was doing and what she was encouraging all the artists around to do. And he's a young man. So he says, my godmother, or whatever the term is, he says, and I was astonished when I last saw Obi Bunya in New York many years ago. I was out there. I was talking with a film called Black's Britannica, which we probably won't have the time to talk about, which I made with a guy called David Koff. Black's Britannica. To this day, I will say to anybody, there is no better piece of literature, storytelling about the condition and the response to their condition of Black people in that period, in the period of the late 70s, yes, than Black's Britannica. It's fantastic. It's capable of shocking even today, because David had the courage to come to England. He was this David Koff, white guy, Californian, I think probably a Jewish white guy from California, but a down radical soul. To this day, some of the best films you'll have seen on colonization, the taking of places in the African continent, made by David Koff. Film called White Man's Country, film called Mau Mau. He made 3 films. The third is not so good, in which he tries to talk about the moment that after colonialism, what happens, with Kenyatta. It's all right, but it's not. But the first 2 films, in terms of just testimony films, saying this is how it happened, folks, and you see very clearly at the bottom of. Sorry, I'm not getting lost. I'm speaking to our point here. How colonialism, which we talk about, and we move on very quickly, at the base of the colonial invasion of these places is extraordinary violence. Extraordinary violence. There are points in the film that David Koff, this is why I'm talking about this. I'll get back to Black's Britannica in a minute. David Koff makes this film, and look at anybody, they should chase them up, find these films by David Koff, because you get he's able to create through his documentary filmmaking a wonderful sense of what happened. So he just takes simple device. Let's look at the diaries of the people who were the leaders of the military groups that were going in to take Kenya. Yes, we're talking late 19th, early 20th century Kenya. This is happening all over this huge continent of Africa. It's happening, but not just the British. All the big Western European nation leaders are in there. And David said, and so you have these things. He says reports, diary of Major so-and-so and so-and-so. We went into this particular district of this part of this country in Kenya. We burnt so many hundred huts. We destroyed so many goats. We raised this amount of stuff. And then diary of so-and-so, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, we moved into this district and we did the same. Yeah? And we killed people. Yeah? But just to have, you have this sense that colonialism is it's not possible without really brutal, vicious violence. It's not possible without the behavior that we're seeing Mr. Putin exercising in the Ukraine today. It's not on. I remember when I was a teacher. Sorry, I'm again jumping all over the place for you, James, but I can't. This is what you're stirring me to. When I was a teacher, I taught sociology. I put a course together. This is how I came to go into the institute. In fact, we might get back to this in the 1970s. I'm a teacher, and I make a course called Underdevelopment and the World System on the sociology course that I teach. We're supposed to be talking about the third world. I taught this course. And we're teaching this course, and I remember using this David Koff's films. This is when I first discovered them. This is before I'd begun to work with him to make Black's Britannica. David Koff's films, and showing them as part of my course. Yes, because on Development the World System was saying, if you don't understand the history of how these things happened, you won't understand why, when you look at the world as it is today, it looks like in all the white people countries, they got development, they're rich and they're sorting stuff out. In all the Black people countries, they got shit. They're suffering. They can't handle it. They're poor. And if you do not know the history, you don't have access to any more than the fascist, racist notion, but it must be because they're black. Because that's what it looks like. And if you don't, so this is why I'm taking the time to talk about David Koff. This is the man, David Koff, yes, turned up in the late 1970s, looking to make film. Somebody pointed him to and said, "There's a guy called Colin Prescod who's doing this, that, and the other, and knows something about. Has begun to play around with the edge of documentary film and so on. Maybe you should go and talk to him." And I said, "David, I will assist you to make this film for WGBH that he and Musindo Munipende, his wife, come over to make in Britain for WGBH. I'll assist you if you can make a film about the politics that I'm making in Britain." See, I'm getting back to what life was like when I went to the Institute, okay? And he said yes, because as it turns out, I didn't know how deeply, he was solid, yeah? He was white, but all right, okay? And we made a film called Black Britannica. It's impossible to show people, or enough people, but it should be in everybody's educational school bag. If you're looking at Britain, because it's really well done as a photograph, as a taking of what was going on in the late 1970s in Britain. Because in a way, David and Musimbo said they come here and they might have smooth talked their way to WGBH by saying, "Well, we're going to, there's a black population over there, in nice place, we don't know there's a black population, an urban population over there. And there are young people, And so they might have been anticipating having a young, gifted and black British film coming back there. We used to joke about this as we spoke about, that's not what they're going to get. In the end, when they got it, WGBH simply re-edited the film that we made and tried to put it out and said it should, for those who study media in the States, in the United States of America, it's a scandal. Yes, a small scandal grew around it, but they tried to hide it and they tried to destroy the film. Talking to people from over here, to British politicians and culturalists, and they tried to not let the voice that we'd made the film about come through. And it's interesting that as soon as in the early 1980s, the streets of Britain's cities began to go up in explosive riots, yes, in every city, town around the place come the early 80s. As soon as that happened, WGBH contacted David and me because some lefty lawyers had taken our case into the courts of the United States of America to fight them over copyright. They contacted us and said, David and me, and they said, you can keep your film. We're going to destroy the version of it that we cut. It's okay, because they had their attempt to deny the righteousness of the voices that we'd opened up in that movie weren't there. This is who I was. Yes, when I went to at the point at which I'm before actually I get to the Institute of Race Relations, and I've lost. Okay, Black Power, Obi Ebunya. Obi Ebunya, therefore, knew my mother. My mother knew Obi Ebunya. Obi Ebunya, you're quite right, is somebody who's part of a name associated with the moment of Black Power, the coming together in Great Britain. The truth is, even from the way I'm speaking, you realize this, that Obi and those people, they're a few years older than I am. And when you're young, that kind of little generational, that can almost make a generational difference. So I'm the leaders of that, and I was not at the dialectics conference. I was around somewhere, but I was not at that. I was not in the leadership of the movement. What was I doing in the 1970s? I was in this period. So I take it you're quite right. There's a Black Power moment. There's even a Black Panther movement. Yes, related to stuff over there. The Black Panther Party, but Black Panther movement over here with really significant people. Great sister. People should know about Althea Jones LeQuant, who is often mentioned as just part of the Mangrove Nine. But in fact, for me, then and now, head and shoulders. The best of the people who were moving in that time. Again, another case of a woman, yes, activist in there, but who's kind of mentioned as as along with, as along with, when in fact, it would really do us some good if we treated her as an originator and not just an accompanist, in some kind of way. Okay, so so in this, I'm sorry, in this period, I'm not of the age of Darcus Howe. I'm not of the age of Althea, and they're ahead of me. Yes, they're well ahead of me. And I'm making a practice from the ground. I mean, this is about the Institute, but it's about how I get to the Institute. Make a practice from the ground. I'm in communities. I'm responding with communities to what's going on, to the humiliations that are being visited on young people for the first time. I'm in communities in which parents who've just begun, who brought their kids up hoping for a better future for them here from the Caribbean, are beginning to realize that something's going really wrong. That their kids are not getting proper educations in the schools, that indeed the state has begun to produce people talking about Caribbean, West Indian children as being educationally subnormal. Literally, this phrase is in the policy reports and so on, and therefore we have to do some special things within the schools. And parents are just beginning to be aware of this. I'm on the ground in a society in which young Black people, young and men in particular, because they're the ones who most get the conversation on the street, are being harassed wherever they gather on the streets. I'm in a place in which a thing that we called sus, which was in the law books, where police would justify stopping people and harassing them and all the rest of it on the basis not that they'd committed a crime, but that they might be about to commit a crime. They suspected them of being about to commit crimes, and this is what's going on in this place. I'm in the place in which these young people, beginning to have young kids, and some of them bringing their kids up, are beginning to realize that it looks as though the future that we're going to have is not the future bright and with promise that we thought we're going to have a future like those diasporan Africans in North America, in the United States of America, I think. We didn't then have prisons full of Black people. Yeah, we didn't have the long history of attacks on people and the killing of people, humiliations and all the rest of it and so on. We didn't have it then. And so we had another possibility. Yes, in big broad terms. And at least that's how people were behaving. And we were reluctant, we were outraged. They, my mother's generation and so on, outraged to find that this was how the hopes that people had arrived with were going to be dashed. Yes, that was the society I was in. So although I wasn't at the dialectics thing, I was part of movements on the ground in my own community and other communities doing that. And the other thing that I should say quickly, this is how I go into the Institute of Race Relations, is that I'm forming with other people like me of my age. I'm getting together to form other spots of resistance and activism. And I become part of something that was at the time really quite famous in a way, but in the history now, it seems to me, this is not me, I'm saying you should be interested. I was part of a thing called the Black Liberator. Black Liberator. We produced a newspaper. We did analysis. In a way, it was like to make the link back to the IRR. It was like a harder outside of charity IRR. See what I mean? Yes, picking up the issues on the street, relating things internationally, and talking about actually the need, talking very frankly in a way that the IRR isn't allowed to do, because its charitable educational status, which is what we function on, doesn't allow us to be explicitly political. It's a funny way we walk. But I'm at this time, back in the 70s, the point just before, in fact, as I'm going to be a volunteer at the Institute of Race Relations, I am part of the Black Liberator Collective. I am that until I've been to the Institute. I'm that until the 1977, 78. I'm still part of the Black Liberator Collective. And I didn't found the Black Liberator Collective. Again, I'm slightly younger than the people. I joined something founded by someone who's slightly older than I am, a man called Ricky Cambridge, a Jamaican man, ex-Cambridge, who comes out of, as many of the people other colonies do when they come out, comes out of a schooling in CP, in Communist Party organizations, yes? And so he founds this thing, but he's questioning, of course, by doing this, he's questioning the CP origin, so to speak. But that's his education, his route. AX Cambridge starts it, and eventually he invites me and 3 or 4 other people, one of them a guy called Cecil Gutsmore, another woman called Gerlin Bean, and so on, to be part of the editorial collective of the Black Liberator. This is what I'm doing, yes, in this period. I'm not at the dialectic conference, but and the Black Liberator wasn't just a magazine being published up there. To sell it, we were outside every and any possible underground station in London. We were behaving in a way like we were the Panthers. Sorry, I mean I'm talking. You know what I mean? My sense of it is, yes, you're right. The awful thing about the Black Liberator, let me be frank, but speaking honestly inside of history, is that in the end, I think I leaned away, we argued, and we may have even stopped producing exactly because I think, I haven't discussed this with my mates, my comrades, my fellow activists. I think because of the education that Ricky had, that Cecil Gutsmore, because particularly AX Cambridge, I'm not speaking against him. I'm really grateful to him. I'm talking about his part of my education. Okay, the language that was used in writing the essays was not a language that the people we were fighting for and hoped we would be writing for could read. Okay, anybody, if anybody doubts and thinks I'm being unfair, you just have to dig into the archive and have a look at it. And I think this produced a kind of contradiction for us, how much we could go. That, in addition to the fact that we didn't have the money to produce this wonderfully stylish magazine that AX Cambridge had invented, yes, and invited me to be part of the stuff on. So this is where I am in the mid-1970s, 74, 75, when I get to go to the Institute. I go to the Institute of Race Relations because I'm a teacher. And I'm a teacher, and I've been in the radical end of higher education, yes? They were called polytechnics now. Now they've been destroyed. Everything's called a university now, all jumped up. Polytechnic was a very distinctive thing. It had a notion of recruiting people who were slightly older, not younger, coming straight out of school. And there was a chance to make really radical educational interventions, which is why I was allowed to, as a contribution to a new degree, to invent a course called Underdevelopment and the World System, which was a way of talking about that. I've already talked about that. So this is, and one of my students on my course, a mature student, guy who was older than I was, a guy called Tony Bunyan, one day came to me and said, there's a man I know, and I think you'd love to meet him. And I think he'd love to meet you. He'd just been, Tony been in my lectures, you could see what I was talking about. And when I followed his advice and took his invitation, and I walked through the doors of the Institute of Race Relations, and I met Sivanandan. So that's how I come to the Institute.
So let's pause right there.
Good.
Because let's in the middle of this is I'm sure our listeners are revved up, like, we are artists, right? We're trying to make sense. And so let's before we move into that, because this is where the importance of IRR50, the importance of IRR is picking up on this strand, because there's some themes here that are happening in the grassroots level. These movements are moving. There is an educational process that is, outside of the structures of a institutional space like a university academies. Even though that's happening, there's multiple things happening at the same time. There's a desire to produce knowledge. There's a desire to disrupt discourse, to create access to people to use this. Put a point, pause that, and let's talk a little bit about the history of IRR and the development of it as an institution simultaneously. So now, if we're thinking about this, we have two columns here. We've created this column of the environment, and now in the middle of this, let's talk a little bit about the history of IRR, and then move into you moving into IRR and the people that were a part of it that kind of was drawn to it.
I feel as though I'm a pretender here. You should be talking really at this point. If you had expansive radio space, you'd say, and now we want to bring in Jenny Bourne.
Yeah,
Jenny Bourne, still alive, still active, now the editor of the journal Race and Class, Sivanandan's very close companion worker all the way through from her young life, was part of the Institute of Race Relations at the point at which, in 1972, the staff, she's one of the staff members, turned the tables on what was then the council. I'm now chairman of the council. Look at that, of the Institute of Race Relations. Then, quite a different setup. The staff turned against the council of the Institute of Race Relations because that institute, and she should be talking. I mean, she can be, and I wish I could just say, Jenny, you take over here. You just talk here, because she now has for me the most authoritative voice on what went on in that time. And for those who know of the journal Race and Class, just to read the little tiny essay, it's 5 or 6 pages, that she puts in at the current issue of the journal Race and Class, which is talking about IRR 50 years after that date, when the staff turned on the council, and the council responded by telling them they were going to be locked out effectively, and the staff went off with the journal, with the name of the journal, with the name of the institute, and they moved from offices in very, very rich London, Mayfair, which is everybody knows, you say Mayfair, hey, that's rich London. That's where their offices were. And they could afford offices there because the people, as Jenny will tell you, as is written in the records by the Institute of Race Relations, the people who started the Institute of Race Relations were very rich people. They belonged to all the big rich companies, the charitable arms of rich companies, international companies and corporations. Siva used to call them the lords of humankind. They founded the Institute for a particular purpose. The Institute was founded, this is my version of it, but people, in order to have it better, they have to read, and there are accounts, read Jenny, read Siva, read I Know What to Get There. But the Institute of Race Relations was founded, there were 2 of them at the same time, one in South Africa and one in London, interestingly, yes, Institute of Race Relations. But the one in London founded an idea, a clever idea, to have an interest in places that had been colonies and were soon going to be, I would say, neo-colonies, going to be independent, yes, but to make connections with the people who are going to be the leading politicians, even the leading trade unionists, the leading journalists and media people, the leading academics, yes, in those places, to connect with them, yes, make that connection. And it seems to me, I would want to describe it now almost as a really smart way of setting up neo-colonialist structures. Okay, this sounds like it's just somebody blowing off, some guy who wants to be famous and blowing off and saying, oh yeah, dismissing them. But actually look at the practice, and that's what the staff at the Institute went inside of. They looked at the practice, and the staff turned on the council at the point on which they realized that there were an Institute of Race Relations, which was looking at race relations, as it was, which is itself a metaphor, race relations in, quotes, the third world, Africa and so on, with a little bit of attention here, but they weren't looking at racism in right here, and how black working class people were at the times they were having the experience that were happening here, and how they were responding. And it was that misfit at a place called the Institute of Race Relations in the heart of London, not talking to or taking seriously the experience or understanding what the experience was here, that made that because the staff were living in those communities, yes, and a lot of people were living there. Now we know, to toss back, famous names now in the Black British halls of fame, like Darcus Howe. Darcus Howe was a member of staff at the Institute of Race Relations. Yes, Race Today, which became one of the leading Black rebel expression organs in the United States of America, started as part of the Institute of Race Relations. And so here are these people with these good titles, with these good possibilities, so to speak, having to witness an institute not actually kind of listening carefully to the ground, not being close enough, and so they made a noise. And to put it very, very flatly, it is out of that noise that what Jenny, I think, very nicely calls the Revolutionary Act, the moment of the Revolutionary Act in April 1972 arose. Yes, staff, a lot of them black people, a lot of them white people who were lefties, Jenny's a white person, a lefty. And we have to get sophisticated enough to realize that these people can be part of the Black movement. Yes, have been part of the Black movement. Yeah, people who surrender themselves to the cause. Yeah, they can be. And we have to understand them. We have to start talking about themselves, because in a way it gives us. I'm going off stream here. It gives us a way of talking sensibly, convincingly about another possibility. A possibility of in which whiteness, to have been born white, or to come out white, doesn't mean that you cannot attach to serious anti-racist, anti-imperialist work. That is a nonsense. Yeah? But it's how we get to be, because the world can be so much like that. I remember Muhammad Ali. Sorry, I'm ranging off now. Muhammad Ali turning a famous British journalist on television one day, who's saying, "But Muhammad, they tell me because you're along with this, with Elijah and all the rest, that you're against you hate white people, and white people are all bad." And he scratched his head and scratched. I don't know if you know this. Scratched his chin, and he looked at me. And he said, "Fast, fast, fast." He said, "Butterfly fast." He said, "Listen, it's like telling me there's a bag here, big crocus bag, you can't see in it. And it's wiggling, it's moving around. You tell me, inside of this bag, there are a whole lot of rattlesnakes, man, rattling around there. And you're telling me, but in there's maybe one or two of them that won't bite you. Put your hand inside." So I understand there's a good reason why Blackness is wary of embracing whiteness too easily, of innocently doing that kind of stuff. Understand? But the point is that this must not lock us into the notion that just in being white, that means they're going to be all wrong. They haven't got the possibility of being connected to a serious anti-racism. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'll just leave that there. So Jenny should be talked to. But that's the story of the Institute. That's how that moment turned. So there's that. Why it turned, because of that thing. And beyond that point, if I'm talking about the institutions that I went into, beyond the break, the revolutionary moment, there was then, I'll never forget the in-between bits, what came before now, the survival and agenda setting phase, yes, of the Institute of Race Relations, because they broke out, but then they had to work out a way to be, not wonderfully well-resourced, in a basement. The physical thing is important. In a basement in the middle of London near King's Cross, St. Pancras, a basement in which very regularly, because that's how badly that would flood when there were big rains. Yes, people had to run down, raise books and magazines off the floor. I'm not talking about things that I don't. By the time I was there, this is how it was. This is where they were. That's when I came. I came to the Institute struggle, this struggle, which I say Jenny and other people should speak before me. I was not part of that struggle. I was not like Darkus or like Jenny or like Hazel or like Sivanandan for that matter. I came 2 or 3 years after to the Institute. Again, as I say, made to go there by my student, who said, you're going to find people who are like you there, who are like you there. And true enough, that's how it was. Although my first encounter with Sivanandan was one in which he tested me. My first encounter with Sivanandan was a confrontation, not a serious confrontation, because he was, and eventually I realized he was testing me, which is what anybody who's serious should always do. Yes.
No, I mean, this is important, and again, I'm glad that again, this is looking at IRR that from that 50th break point, because as you said, there's an agenda setting here. But what was obviously important is to look at the coalition of different types of forces and people and different types of things that actually this break moved the IRR forward to where we are now. And let's talk a little bit more about that agenda setting phase. You're now moving into this space. You're being brought into this space because of work and things that have been done, consistently. This long genealogy of resistance that is happening, and you're moving into this space. Talk about that space. Talk about that post period, that agenda setting period to move us to now. I'm thinking also about maybe touching on, internationalism, maybe talking about, the different people that kind of help mold and shape, IRR as as this revolutionary break, as Jenny writes in this editorial, the title of this revolutionary act kind of happens.
Jenny, in her little piece that introduces this little essay that I've talked about, suggests that the IRR's battle against the establishment, so to speak, that I've just described, represented by the council and so on, and that line, was closely related to the battles raging in the universities in that era after 1968. Yes, and this went on well into the 70s. But I also, and yes, and it's obvious, you can tell, just a little glance will tell you what that is. But I want to add that it's also, and I don't think she's not saying that it isn't, but it's also related to battles grounded in British Black community, frontline struggles. Yes, these are struggles, I think I've already touched on them. These are struggles that are in people's faces, struggles against sus. Yes, young Black people on the street, where they gather in their clubs, whatever else it is. There's what I can easily describe as an assault on their presences. Yeah, that at one point in this period in the 70s, every few months across the country, in Birmingham, in Liverpool, in London, there are reports of police attacking sites of young Black people enjoying themselves, coming together to play music, to whatever else it is, gathering on a weekend, a Friday night on a weekend, for a big party, so to speak, at the youth centers, effectively. But the police justifying their actions by saying locals in the area are being disturbed by seeing so many young Black people, afraid of their boisterousness, afraid of this, that, and the other, and deciding that to go in to see what's going on, because surely there must be something awful going on and there must be some bad business wanting to break in. People, of course, saying, no, we're not going to have this. You can't just come in here and stop our stuff. And that was more than enough excuse for the police to then bring in, the wrath of the state to lay on their heads, bodies broken, limbs broken, and so on, every day. My politics, my everyday politics is rushing to the assistance of these people, usually after the event, because they'd be arrested, because of course they'd resist, and then there'd be court cases. There were the place is littered with headlines that would say the Islington 18, the something else 9, the something else 2, the Oval 4, everywhere. Evidence of the fact that this assault was going on. So that's what's going on. Those battles are going on in the street at this point. Again, I've mentioned the ESN, educationally subnormal attacks on the mentalities, so to speak, on the intellectual possibilities that people can aspire to in the society. There is then, of course, the state's direct white privilege immigration legislation from the British state of this period. This is where the state is bringing in laws that say it's about white patron. Only, in a sense, the only people who have the right to be citizens here are people who are from outside, yes, are from the white colonies, effectively, yeah? Black people. So literally, the Black presence is being alienated, literally alienated, in this period. This is what's going on out there. So it's not just that the universities are doing this. The universities up in ferment. It's interesting because from that space you get some radical intellectuals, if you like, yes, coming in. But because the institute under Sivanandan's guidance, leadership rather, is connected, is really on the ground, seriously grounded. It's looking at what this means. It's standing alongside them, and it's trying to produce clear understandings that support and arm the people responding of what the predicament is. Yes, I mean, to speak frankly, what it is. This is the ground, and it's wonderful ground for a place that has that as its sense of mission. Yes, it's really great ground for them to be working, for us to be working in, which is why I got there, and other people were attracted there. People who were thinking people from the universities, Black and white. Not too many in this period, because we're behind the USA. Not too many Black people taking positions in for a very long time. I got my job in 1967, 68, 69. When I entered the academy to be a teacher. In the 70s, there are very few people like me, Black academics in the land. When people see me, when the students see me walking the first into a room, they don't believe it. Black and white. This is how ridiculous our history of racism is. Absolutely jokey. But that's how it was. So people from the university were attracted to a place that was wanting to talk sense, like the Institute with its journal, which began as race, which is what it inherited from the old institute, and turns itself into race and class in order to make clear, to wear its stuff on its sleeve. So yes, they're coming there. But actually, I would want to argue that for the institute, in terms of Black radical tradition struggle, it's the institute's closeness to the battles on the ground. We have very alive, very explosive, very responsive to discrimination communities up and down the country. People are being bad-mouthed, of course, in this period because Jamaicans are a massive part of the Caribbeans who are coming here, a larger part of the body coming here. They get the reputation of being feisty and wayward and impossible and all the rest of it. But of course, so when you're in the face of what they were facing, of course they were. Of course they had to be. So this is, and the Institute opens itself saying, we are for this. Not just looking, not just waiting to look at the reports that come out in the papers when something explodes enough for a journalist to be attached to it, but inviting people in to the Institute, inviting the campaigners in to the Institute. This is what the Institute is in that time. And it's and there hasn't been much like it before then, and maybe not much like it since.
No, you're absolutely right, and so this obviously leads to, as we have now set the stage, set this, and we're getting to at least to a point that I would say that we can pause and probably have a conversation, extend this conversation with folk who are been involved but who are involved now. The notion that you're raising in the context of understanding what most people or some people may say theory and practice and theory is basically the institutionalization of the IRR. How do we understand and collect knowledge, disseminate knowledge, exchange ideas in order to change society, right? This is all of this is going on. You're having folk, I'm thinking about, Stuart Hall. I'm thinking about, of course, yourself, Jenny Bourne. There's a range of people. Cedric Robinson, comes in. Very formative period. That what is important about the discourse of radicalism that is happening, particularly here, but also around, is that you have a lot of these ideas that Cedric Robinson is associated with, but he's part of a community and a collective of people who have been, such as yourself, doing this work, engaged in struggle, but now attempting to really institutionalize this to actually amplify using research, using, access, creating a discourse that challenges, that basically, that we're literally engaging in the work that transnational, that internationalism becomes essential. We're engaging. There are people who are just now discovering, Cedric Robinson's work. A good colleague and friend, as you know, we all were on a conversation together. Josh Myers just wrote an intellectual biography of Cedric Robinson.
Very fine.
Talk a little bit about, or just kind of expand upon the importance of research, maybe using, the leadership, the folk who were engaged, and how these intellectual currents are really kind of merging theory and practice.
Let me ground it.
Okay.
Let me try to ground it, James, because I'm, as you realize, I respond from the ground that I stand on all the time, and I come into conversations probably because I'm now old enough to behave like this. Actually, not necessarily using the language of now, but the language but clear, clean language for me. Okay, you say internationalism. I hear it. absolutely right, and it's correct. You and I say that if we were to ask me, what was the frame in which Institute of Race Relations made its practice? And I'd say that, okay, of course, first of all, it's anti-racist. Now, this is what it's what it is. It's race relations, and then it has a journal called Race and Class and so on. But in fact, it seems to me that Sivanandan and the people who gathered around him, and the people who came to connect to the thinking that was coming out of the Institute, were people who I used this phrase recently, only to very recently I've begun to use, for whom anti-racism was yoked to anti-imperialism. Yeah? So, and if I say anti-imperialism, you see where I'm going to. This is internationalism. Yes, this is a major defining fact of the internationalism in which we live. Yes, or the internationalism that we want to strive to develop. But it's the thing that puts us there is that. So if the Institute is anti-racist, its anti-racism is always anti-racist and anti-imperialist. Yes, this is where it collects its people. If you know that, and you're from South Africa, or from Sri Lanka, or from Brazil, or from or from the United States of America, for that matter, yes, you know that this is a place that wants to talk about your place in the world, your place in the history of the world, your place in the world as it is. So we don't come to internationalism as internationalists, is what I'm saying. Yes, we come to it. What drives us into internationalism is imperialism, yes, which is the great internationalizing force. Yeah, it's global. It's global today. Is the word that we use. So right. So to simplify it, I don't have to go all the way around. I might have to come to say. So how come you were internationalists? Well, we're born into a situation which that has to be our response. Yeah. And out of that, and I'm not trying to oversimplify with some ridiculous intention. Out of that, it means that people in universities here and people in universities abroad who are intellectual activists, yes, so to speak, are attracted. Cedric Robinson comes to the Institute of Race Relations and to race and class because we have that perspective. It's his. He's been looking for it all over the fucking place. Sorry about the swearing word for you people. Every now and then I get upset, frustrated, okay? So I take that back. Squeak it out, yes?
Yeah, it's okay.
For your audience. Cedric is having a hard time finding places to publish over where he is. And so he comes to us because the word's out. And when he begins to connect, people say, we understand you. And he says, hey, you understand me. Huh? And so you look at him and you look at Josh's book on Cedric. And one of the things that he says, it doesn't marveling is, and then look at what happens to Cedric. His publications, his first in the beginning, boom, 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 boom. It's in Race and Class, boom, 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 boom. Yeah? And that's just one example. Yeah, I can think of a guy called Ken Jordan. I mean, every time I try to start going with names, I feel it's not good. I want Jenny next to me because I'll forget them, and it looks like I'm picking on some and not on others. But for anybody who wants to be a scholar or investigate, to look back at the names of the people who are on the Institute's journal, Race and Class. Yes. I'm thinking of a man called, for example, Ekbal Ahmed, not a name now, hugely important figure internationally in terms of activism, is at some point very close to inside of the editorship of Race and Class. And this, I'm looking at third worlders, but there are a number of white folks who are big. Basil Davidson. I mean, they're not going to come to me because I haven't prepared myself for listing it. Who are attracted to this? They're attracted to the Institute. It looks like it's to Siva, but of course it's what Siva's made the Institute into being, in service of. So you will find, just look back down the lists of the publications, look at the list of the names of the people who were part of the editorial working committee of the journal Race and Class, and you'll see the reach and the pull and the engagement that we had. That's what gives you those are the credentials, yes, that tell you that it's proper for the Institute of Race Relations to be seen as a place that it's worth looking at to see how it plugs into activism, and what place it's held inside of it.
And this obviously led, one of the questions of the importance of the archive, right? So we are mapping genealogies. We are trying to, get an understanding or develop or strengthen a historical consciousness in order to understand and move towards the future, and to continue a genealogy of struggle. So the archive, you're touching on that. The notion of the archive play in knowledge production and access to knowledge. And this is what the Institute provides. The Institute allows, that particular access. I think, it's probably, a good time to probably put a pin in our conversation as we kind of wrap up, because this was rich. And I love the fact that this is really giving us an opportunity to have a part two and understanding and bridging, a lot of these particular ideas. So, with that being said, as we put a pin in it, I don't want to say conclude, but, what does I can probably glean, obviously, and anyone listening to this can understand, what IRR, the 50th anniversary means to you, but what do you think that it means for scholars and activists across the world today? And as far as how can you give like just obviously it's not going to be a very authoritative, but you can have a vision, you can have a scan of the territory. How does all of this play IRR50? What does it mean today? Because again, we opened this conversation with there seems to be a sense that there's gaps growing in the context of people's historical consciousness. So memory keepers such as yourself and developing folks such as myself to make sure we hold these things together become very important. IRR seems to me becomes essential in all of these particular nexuses. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to you? How do you think that it can be looked at from folk who are engaged in struggle today?
James, you're going to kick me, you're going to hate me. I have to take a little dive to back, because I'm giving you an editorial challenge, because there's one more thing I want to say about internationalism before I move. Don't forget your question about the Institute now. And it is very simply this, because in my response to you on internationalism, I say, you see how, Sivanandan people came to us, anti-imperialism, there's another much more on the ground, I wanted to mention it particularly, route to internationalism for us at the Institute of Race Relations here. And that is to say that the people we were fighting for and writing for, our constituencies, the activist constituencies here, were, most of us, only a couple generations, at most, away from the periphery, from the margins, from colonized societies, abroad. So our constituency is internationalist. From India and Pakistan, yes, and these new populations, from the Caribbean and so on. One of the things I have to tell you, I'd say something provocative to an American audience. When we used to look at you back in those days, I regularly hear people, not necessarily in the Institute, but saying, those Americans, those Black Americans, for all that they're doing all this kind of stuff, but they don't have much, this is why Cedric found us, much of an internationalist perspective. They've been there such a long time inside of this great imperialist center, part of the propaganda fix-up of that thing, that they don't have it. Yes, it's not true entirely. There were people, African Americans, who talked about their Africanness, yes, so to speak, yes, I mean, from way back. But the point is that for the mass, yes, there was no sense that African Americans knew that they belonged in the same pot as as poor people in what was called the Third World. Okay, it's very empty. In spite of the fact that, like here, they're constantly being regenerated by new bunches of people, migrant settlers, yes, and not least from the Caribbean and so on. So that internationalism is this grand thing up here as the fighting of imperialism, but it's also grounded, yes, in how our people feel. They have people there. People still come and go from there. They know that we have a bigger sense of how the world bees, how it is, than the English do. Who've been brought up on the notion that they're an island and they're an island people who've made their own way and it's all down to them. Yeah, we know so different, and that's one of the frustrations. It's an interesting intellectual frustration that must feed into a mental frustration that one has when one is talking to people all the time who are behaving in arrogant ways, as they understand, they know better than you do, when it's only too clear to you that they do not know the world in which they sit. You can't have a tune in Britain by the fascist group, the BNP, Black National British National Fascist Party, where one of their chants was, "There ain't no black in the Union Jack." Nice play with words, but it's such a lot of nonsense if you know how empire was made, if you know where the riches come from. And these people, we know this, yes? We know it with our mother's milk, we know this, okay? So internationalism is not a grand concept that we've got to go to university to find out, or that we've got to join a revolutionary party to find out about, yes? It's how we be.
The embodiment. It's an embodiment. The embodiment of that genealogy becomes important. And your point, actually, your point about the international perspective actually is the center of my work, particularly critiquing the theory and practice of human rights using Black radical manifestations of freedom movements. And this is a global context because there was a particular point. And also this internationalism, having an international perspective, as you said, was marginalized for a purpose, particularly in the United States. And, not to move, to keep, again, we could talk forever, but I think it's time for us to probably just, again, put a pin in it. Your point is very important. Your point is very important in the context that the embodiment of that worldness, of carrying one's ancestral and historical memory, not far removed. People are coming back and forth. So that memory is a constant flow. That blood, is a constant flow. So, with that, I guess let's situate this into some closing comments, or I should say some pausing comments. And how do we understand it? How will we be able to look at how can the IRR be looked at or utilized based upon this genealogy and this history that has been set out? That to me seems to be, and I think that you probably may share, may differ, that's on pause right now. There's a lot of pressure, but the rise of fascism, the rise of the global aspect of marginalization and replacement theory and all this stuff is calling, on this history. It's demanding that we stand into this particular tradition, as I see it. You're welcome to comment, and as we kind of.
James, let's not risk people thinking that we're saying, oh, the all those the struggles, on the ground, the visceral struggles, the struggles against humiliation, against the racism that kills, that maims, that stunts lives, are historical. So now all we got to do is remind people of the history. So this is nonsense. Anybody will know this is nonsense. They multiply. The phrase that I make my own, that I come from a conversation with Sivanandan. Racism changes in order to survive. It ain't gone nowhere. It sophisticates its practices and so on, which is why we have to go on and on and on and on. So the Institute today, what's its today and its tomorrow, it's first and foremost, it's still there alongside and as part of supporting current grassroots and anti-establishment struggles. They're absolutely essential because the establishment changes all the time. We've got people, Jesus, in our government right now in the United States of America, we have a bunch of conservatives in charge who are dangerous and awful. But I won't go on about that. Anybody Yeah, you can look at that. Any newspaper will tell you what's going on now. So that's foremost. That continues to be where the Institute started, is where it still is, unfortunately, in terms of the centrality of that struggle. But in addition to that, because we've stayed around, this is not a triumphalist statement. We've stayed around for 50 years. Yeah, it's something to marvel at in a way, not something to celebrate, to marvel at, because we're still needed, and we're managing to go on being. That history though that we've been part of, because we've been close to the ground, we've become a repository of the history and of the knowledge that comes from having access to that history, and we therefore inherit from the Sivanandan, yes, a duty, yes, to work this archive. Yeah? An activist's archive is only as useful as the degree to which it is animated. Yeah, and we take it on because there's so much work to be done now all the time, and it's not where we started off, you know, doing history, knowledge, education. It's for us to get ourselves in shape, yes, to be able to be up to this new, now urgent task of putting the history back in, of being part of the knowledge making around access to that history, is something that we're still teaching ourselves how to do, to be quite honest. Okay, but from our conversation, Rise, this is not new for us. It really isn't. We have stuff that we've produced ourselves that shows what you do with an archive. Yes, the struggles films that we have are part of that. There are any number of publications that we have for our interventions from earlier on that are part of that education. And so more and more, this archive work, this digging into the radical tradition, yes, and grounding knowledge production, yes, in that history, in that tradition, lies in the IRR's current and future work. We are fully aware of it. And realize that there's a challenge to that, because it's not enough to say there's an archive, there's history. Actually, if you're really thinking about engaging people, you have to work out the ways in which people can access the knowledge that is locked into that archive. So we have to become imaginative about this. You talked about culture earlier on. It's usually over here in some kind of ways. But a few years ago, I gave a talk. The imagination is a really important part of the toolkit that we have to bring to this moment. Yes, acts of the imagination are key to how we put this digging into the radical tradition work into practice. I want to stop now. We're exhausted.
Yes, we are. I just wanted to end. Just add to this point that you're making about the access part. And learning how, and also we have to understand that there's an evolution in how we produce and input the knowledge into a living archive. So that, this notion of, and I'm glad you helped the listeners when I was talking about, this, when I talk about history, I'm talking about as a living tradition, right? That's a very, very important. I don't look at history in a very linear fashion as something being dead. History is not just tying linear fashion. So your point and this point becomes very important, because as we're still learning, we also got to still learn the evolutions and the mechanisms that we are producing knowledge and we're inputting into a living archive. And that space allows us to, and having an understanding that this evolution of racism, and the evolutions of imperialism, right, becomes important. Colin, thank you so much. Again, it has been a wonderful conversation with you again. This is obviously not going to be the last time. There's other things that we could talk about, that we engage in, and I look forward to engaging with you more. Thank you again.
Let's engage again as soon as the opportunity presents itself, James. And thank you. I've done my best to try to keep up with your grand scheme. But thank you.
Thank you very much. No problem. Okay. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
Yeah,
the ones left to make do with the two hands the good Lord gave us. With no resources and thrown to the forces that be, with no one to save us. The ones in the classroom where the books are outdated, teacher no longer outspoken. The ones left to congregate where the pusher gives a fix to those who had their dreams broken. The ones left to drown and rebuild the towns in the path of the waters from the levees. The ones with the problems of the world on their back but make light of the fact that the weight is getting heavy. We are the ones who have daughters and sons who commit themselves to having unsafe nights. The ones who lost family in 9/11, hours after telling them to have a safe flight. We are the ones. We are the.
We are the. We are the.
We are the ones.
We are the.
We are the.
We are the. We be the soul, the human core, the planet whose blood, sweat, and tears even we take for granted. We the ones separated by waters and international borders only to take government orders. We are the ones with the same childhood dreams, but adulthood brings nightmares and screams. We be the raw excuse to slang, I mean, we the people they stereotype for gangs. Who sold the sea for our daughters and sons withstand the infiltration of drugs and guns. We are the ones that kneel to the young with a heart of gold to avoid being victimized by our sons. We be the ones trying to raise them into all-man brothers, not some whipping posts from coast to coast. We are the people run down, lied to, cried to, still they depend on our culture to live and dance to. We are the people, still the wretched of the earth. At the end of God's day, we persevere through the...
That's it for Africa World Now Project for this week. I would like to thank you for joining us today and look forward to spending time with you next week. We can be reached through all your regular social media platforms. Email africaworldnowproject@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter @AFWRLDNWPRJ. Instagram @Africa World Now Project. Access to our other media platforms can be reached through the bios of our social media. I'm your host and producer, James Pope. The Africa World Now Project Collective consists of international media journalist, executive producer, and human rights activist, Moiza Muntali, Africa World Now Project media correspondent, Buna Ngonda, senior research content contributor and production director, Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui, senior research content contributor and production associate, Dr. Josh Meyer, associate producer and content contributor, Dr. Keisha Khan Perry, content contributor and filmmaker, Kurt Waterson, technology advisor is Byron Gray of Grayworks Technology, and creative directors, international creative and artist designer, Tabassum Siddiqui and Judah Pope. Africa World Now Project can be heard every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on WSNC, NPR affiliate and broadcast service of Winston-Salem State University. Programs are archived and available on all podcast platforms. Search Africa World Now Project. Until next week, be safe, be peaceful, and above all, be intelligent.